declare before God that we need His mercy. And what we're doing when we do that is we're declaring that what He has declared to us to be the right way to live our lives is in fact something we bow our knee before because it's right. Okay? Because this is the right way to live. And if we miss it, the beauty of it is, and that's what we're going to talk about, is there's a mercy seat. And there still is a mercy seat. So let's talk a little bit about how it was established. It was in Exodus in the 25th chapter. I'm going to start there. We'll bounce around a little bit. I'm going to read just a few verses so we kind of get a feel for what was going on. And this is where the Lord is telling Moses how to construct this area that we were just talking about. So in Exodus 25, starting in verse 10.
Offerings for the tabernacle?
Yeah. It says, they shall make an ark of shittim wood, 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and a cubit and a half the breadth thereof, and a cubit and a half the height thereof. Now, he was very detailed about exactly how big it was supposed to be and so forth. So, but this is a key part right here. It says, thou shalt overlay it with pure gold. Within and without you shall overlay it, and shall make upon it a crown of gold round about. Okay, so they're making the ark of the covenant of God. And it has to be in His presence, it has to be pure. And when gold is tried in the fire, and maybe you've heard some sermons about us being tried in the fire, when we go through difficult times, a lot of times these trials, God uses them to bring purity into us. In other words, as we go through our trials, He brings us to a place in Him where we trust Him with the trial. And that actually purifies us when we do that, because we become less and less reliant on who we are and more reliant on who He is. And He promises, like the song said, that He'll never forsake us. When we come to Him, He is there for us. He loves us with everything that He's got in Him. And He has made a way clear back here. This was clear back before Jesus came. He's making a promise to the people. There's going to be access, okay? But He said, in my presence, there has to be purity. So when we enter in, and we've got the gift of righteousness of Christ in us that we've received, because we've received Christ as Savior, and when we've got that going on, then that's the purity that He looks on. He doesn't look on us, He looks on our heart to see if the righteousness of His Son is there. And then we are able to access, even as the high priest used to do, that most holy place, and to be in God's presence, okay? So it had to be pure, and that's what He's declaring here. It's got to be overlaid with pure gold, that ark even. And the rings that it was going to be carried by had to be purest gold. And the staves, the shafts that they would put through the rings on each side, also had to be coated in purest gold. And it had to be gold that had been tried, and it was purified, and that's what they coated everything with. And so when they put those rings in and they carried that ark around, that's the only way they could come near the ark. Because once this was done, and God established what was going to be placed in it, which is what we're going to get to, when he established that, then nobody could touch it after that. They could only carry that ark around with the 2 staves that go through the rings on the side. Because to touch the ark, and what we're going to talk about here in a little bit is there's a reason they couldn't. And let me just delay that a little bit, but let's go a little bit further. It says right here in the 16th verse, you shall put into the ark the testimony which I will give thee. And there you have the testimony that He was going to give Moses was up on the mountain, up on Mount Horeb. And the testimony that it was going to give Moses was the 10 Commandments. And the 10, of course, have been, Jesus summarized the 10 with the 2. Love God and love your neighbor, okay? Yeah. But all of those things that are in the 10 Commandments are about how we're supposed to live our lives and how we're supposed to interact with other people, okay? So not only were the tablets of stone going to be placed into the ark, which we'll get to, but there was a presence of God that was going to be there. And He was going to be, because that's who He was within that ark, then nobody could physically touch it at that time. In fact, somebody who did was killed during David's time. Okay, you shall make, and then he said right here, this is key, he said, you shall make a mercy seat of pure gold. And he tells the size of it again, 2 cubits and a half shall be the length, and a cubit and a half the breadth thereof. And you shall make 2 cherubims of gold, of beaten work you shall make them in the 2 ends of the mercy seat. Now he's got cherubims that are facing each other, and they are facing across the mercy seat. And so they're looking to one another, but they're also looking through the mercy of God, because God's going to sit on that mercy seat. And he said, you will make 1 cherub on the one end and the other cherub on the other end. Even though the mercy seat shall you make the cherubims on the 2 ends, and they shall stretch forth their wings on high, covering the mercy seat with their wings, and their faces look towards one another. Toward the mercy seat shall the faces of the cherubims be. And you shall put the mercy seat upon and above the ark. And in the ark you shall put the testimony that I will give thee, and there I will meet with you, and I will commune with you from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubims which are upon the ark of the testimony of all the things I will give thee in commandment unto the children of Israel. So right here, at the very beginning of all things, God is declaring that he wants to have mercy. We're not perfect. He knows we're not perfect. Certainly back then, before Jesus came, nobody had any opportunity to even be perfect or have any righteousness about them. So God is still making a way for the priest, the high priest, to come in once a year and to make atonement for the sins of the people. But God's desire is, and when the priest went in, he brought a blood offering of an innocent lamb. He brought a blood offering, and he made that offering before the Lord. And he made the offering as he knelt basically before the Ark of the Covenant. And as he's kneeling before the Ark of the Covenant that contains the law that God gave in the 2 tablets, he's acknowledging that the law is right. He's acknowledging that the law is right, and he's declaring through the blood offering that there has to be a blood offering to wash away the sins. Of course, then it was the blood of an animal, so it was only making atonement for a year. That's all it was good for. When Jesus came, it was permanent, when he shed his blood. So this is the type of thing that God is not only declaring, I want to have mercy. In other words, the law is here, but God is saying, I'm up here on the mercy seat between the cherubim. And even though I'm looking down on the law and I know that you've broken it, I want to have mercy on you because I love you. And that's what he's saying. Let me go to 2 Chronicles real quick. I want to go to 2 Chronicles, and I'm going to go to chapter 5.
What verse? What verse?
Chapter 5 and verse 8.
Verse 8?
Okay. This is where we've actually had the temple getting built, and Solomon has built the temple. Back in Moses' time, we're dealing with a tent, and we're dealing with curtains and all kinds of things that they built, and they would, carry it around with them, and God would lead them for 40 years in the desert during the Exodus time. But here we're talking about what's going on with the temple having been built, and Solomon has prayed a prayer, and this is where the presence of the glory of the Lord fills that temple. Okay? It says in verse 8, for the cherubim spread forth their wings over the place of the ark. There you go, again. And the cherubims covered the ark and the staves thereof above. And they drew out the staves of the ark, that the ends of the staves were seen from the ark before the oracle, but they were not seen on the outside. And that's how it is until this day, it says, at the time of this writing. There was nothing, and this is key, there was nothing in the ark except the 2 tables which Moses put therein at Horeb, when the Lord made a covenant with the children of Israel when they came out of Egypt. God was saying Egypt was a type of the world and the world system, and they were worshiping a man as a god, the Pharaoh, and they were basically in bondage and slavery. And God is saying, I'm delivering you out of bondage. I'm delivering you out of the bondage, and I'm delivering you out of the ways of this world, and I'm delivering you out of worldly thinking, and I'm bringing you to myself, and I'm going to give you a heart that is towards me. I'm going to give you who I am, and I'm going to give you my mercy. That's what he's saying. So when we come in now, we don't really always understand who we are. And here's Solomon has built a temple. So let me go a little further. We're going to go to Hebrews chapter 9. I'm not going to be very long. I don't want to wear you all out here. But Hebrews chapter 9, verse 2. This is kind of an introduction to what we're going to try to do. And I may only get to do this every other week because I have to work on Sundays every other week.
I can always do the message if you're not working.
Yeah, you can do it. Hebrews chapter 9, starting in verse 2. Well, let me just go ahead and start in verse 1. It says, Then verily the first covenant had also ordinances of divine service in a worldly sanctuary. That's what we were just talking about. That first covenant under the old covenant was a set of ordinances for divine service. And there was a particular way in which that priest had to come in. You know, they even say they said that they tied a rope around his ankle, and they had the bells on the bottom of his gown and his robe that he wore to go in there, so that if actually he had sinned and he shouldn't be in the presence of God and he'd drop dead, they'd be able to pull him back out. So, and this is really how they did it. But so he goes in to and this is something for God to say this, but he says a worldly sanctuary. In other words, under the old covenant, that's what it was. Even though his presence was in there, it was still a worldly type sanctuary. It was a sanctuary that was built by human hands, okay? Can we get that part?
Yeah.
It was built by human hands. It was built specifically in the manner that God wanted it to be built, and according to his exact specifications. But because man built the temple, it was still a worldly sanctuary, okay? And that's basically the same as all the churches that we might want to go to. They are worldly sanctuaries unless the presence of God is there, okay? That's basically it. It's the presence of Jesus. Well, how does Jesus' presence get there? That's what we want to get to. There was a tabernacle made, verse 2, for there was a tabernacle made, the first, wherein was the candlestick and the table and the shewbread, which is called the sanctuary. And after the second veil, the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all. There you got it. It's the holiest of all. That inner place that was guarded by the curtain that only the high priest could go into. It had the golden censer. It had the Ark of the Covenant overlaid round about with gold, wherein was the golden pot. And now here you go, because I want you to see this, because back in Numbers 17:8. Before I read that next part, I'm going to go back to Numbers 17, real quick like. Let me get back here.
In the front.
Remember how I said that they put the tables of stone, which had the law, the 2 tables of stone that God wrote with his finger on top on Mount Horeb and gave it to Moses twice, because he had to go back up there twice because the people sinned?
Yeah.
Okay, so in Numbers 17, and in verse 8, it says, it came to pass, and this is what was going on. This is part of the Exodus. It's listed in Numbers. But the people have complained, if you will, about having nothing but manna to eat, which was the bread of life of heaven. Okay? It's the bread of life of heaven. They're complaining and they're going into rebellion because they've been lost out in the desert.